When you picture the home of an ancient humans, what comes to mind? A dark cave, a crackling fire, a family wrapped in animal skins, hiding from dangerous animals outside. It's an image we've seen in cartoons, movies, and even school books for decades. In fact, it's so common that most of us never stop to question it. But what if I told you that this picture is only a small part of the story? The truth is, most ancient humans probably never lived in caves at all. Instead, they built shelters from branches, animal hides, grass, mud, and even the bones of giant mammoths. Some stayed in the same place for months. Others packed up their entire homes and followed herds across hundreds of kilometers. Long before bricks, concrete, or even farming existed, our ancestors had already learned one of the most important survival skills in human history: how to build a home. So where did they actually live? How did they build shelters without metal tools? Who shared these homes? And what did it really feel like to wake up inside one nearly 50,000 years ago? Let's find out. Imagine opening your eyes just before sunrise. The air outside is cold enough to make your breath visible, but inside your shelter it's surprisingly warm. Above your head, dozens of long branches bend together to form a dome, covered with layers of thick animal hides and bundles of dry grass. The roof creaks softly every time the wind blows, but it holds. In the center of the shelter, yesterday's fire still glows beneath a layer of ash. One of the adults quietly places another piece of wood onto the embers, and within seconds, orange flames begin to dance again. Around you, people slowly wake up. A child rubs their eyes before crawling closer to the warmth of the fire. Someone checks a spear that will be used during today's hunt. Another person gathers woven bags that will soon be filled with berries, roots, or firewood. Outside, the world is silent. Morning mist hangs over the nearby river, and beyond it stretches an endless landscape of forests, grasslands, and distant hills. This is your home. Not a castle, not a house, not even a cave. Just a carefully built shelter standing between your family and the dangers of the natural world. For ancient humans, a home wasn't a symbol of wealth or comfort. It was the difference between life and death. One freezing night without shelter could be enough to kill. One storm could soak your clothes, extinguish your fire, and leave your family dangerously exposed. A good shelter wasn't a luxury, it was survival. Yet despite this, one idea has followed prehistoric humans for generations. The idea that they were all cave people. It's easy to understand why. When archaeologists first began uncovering evidence of our ancestors, many of their greatest discoveries came from caves. Deep inside them, they found stone tools, fireplaces, animal bones, and some of the oldest paintings ever created by human hands. Places like Lascaux in France and Altamira in Spain became famous around the world. These incredible discoveries painted a picture of prehistoric life that seemed obvious. Ancient humans lived in caves, except that's not what the evidence actually says. The reason we find so many ancient remains inside caves has less to do with where people lived and far more to do with how history survives. Imagine building a shelter today using nothing but wood, leaves, and animal skins. Now leave it alone for 30,000 years. Rain falls, wood rots, grass disappears, animals carry parts away. Wind scatters everything across the landscape. Eventually, almost nothing remains. Now imagine leaving a stone spear and a fireplace inside a dry cave. The cave protects them from rain. It shields them from strong winds. Layer after layer of soil slowly covers the evidence, preserving it like a natural time capsule. Thousands of years later, archaeologists discover it almost exactly where it was left. In other words, caves didn't necessarily preserve more people. They simply preserved more evidence. That's a huge difference. In fact, many experts believe that for much of prehistory, the majority of people spent their lives living out in the open, not because they preferred it, because they had no choice. Caves are surprisingly rare. Across huge parts of Africa, where our species first evolved, there simply weren't enough caves for everyone. The same was true across many grasslands, river valleys, and forests around the world. If your group reached an area with no cave nearby, you couldn't just wait for one to appear. You had to build your own home. And that's exactly what humans became incredibly good at doing. The first step wasn't building, it was choosing the right place. Ancient humans couldn't check weather forecasts or satellite maps. Everything depended on observation. A good campsite had to solve several problems at once. The first was water. Without a reliable source of clean water, no group could survive for long. Rivers, lakes, and springs were often the center of daily life, providing not only drinking water but also fish, birds, and animals that came to drink. But living too close to water could also be dangerous. After heavy rain, rivers could flood without warning, washing away shelters and supplies overnight. So people searched for higher ground nearby, close enough to collect water but far enough to stay safe. Then came food. A beautiful campsite meant nothing if there was nothing to eat. Groups looked for places rich in edible plants, nuts, berries, and game animals. During different seasons, they often returned to locations that had provided food before, building new shelters in places they already knew well. The surrounding landscape also mattered. Dense forests offered wood for fires and building materials, but they reduced visibility. Open plains made it easier to spot predators from far away, yet they provided little protection from strong winds. Every location was a compromise. The perfect home wasn't necessarily the most comfortable one. It was the one that gave your family the greatest chance of surviving another season. Building a shelter without modern tools was far more difficult than simply stacking a few branches together. Every material had to be collected by hand. Long, straight branches became the skeleton of the shelter. Younger, flexible trees were carefully bent into curved arches without snapping. Thick bushes were stripped for smaller sticks that could tie the frame together. Then came the roof. In warmer regions, layers of leaves, grass, and reeds were spread across the frame to keep out the sun and light rain. In colder climates, animal hides were stretched tightly over the structure, creating a waterproof barrier that trapped precious warmth inside. If gaps remained, they were filled with mud, moss, or bundles of dry grass. Nothing was wasted. Every material came directly from nature. And unlike modern houses, these shelters weren't designed to last for decades. They were designed to survive the next storm. One of the simplest shelters our ancestors built is known today as a lean-to. Imagine placing a long wooden pole between two trees. Against that pole, dozens of branches are leaned at an angle before being covered with leaves and hides. The result isn't large or beautiful, but it blocks wind remarkably well and can often be built within just a few hours. For groups constantly following migrating animals, speed mattered far more than appearance. If they knew they would leave in a few days, there was no reason to spend weeks building something permanent. But not every shelter was temporary. As humans spread into colder parts of Europe and Asia, survival demanded stronger homes. Simple lean-tos were no longer enough. Winter winds could strip away body heat in minutes, and heavy snow could collapse weak roofs. People began building circular huts with stronger wooden frames that distributed weight more evenly. Their rounded shape also reduced the force of strong winds, much like modern domes. Several layers of animal hides created insulation, while thick beds of grass covered the floor to separate people from the freezing ground below. One of the most fascinating discoveries archaeologists have ever made comes from the frozen plains of Ice Age Ukraine. Around 20,000 years ago, some groups faced a major problem. There were very few trees. Without timber, how do you build a house? Their solution was extraordinary. They used mammoth bones. After hunting or sometimes scavenging the remains of woolly mammoths, people carefully arranged enormous leg bones and skulls into circular walls. Wooden poles, where available, helped support the roof, while hides stretched across the top created shelter from snow and wind. Sites like Mezhirish still preserve the outlines of these incredible structures today, proving just how adaptable humans had become. These weren't crude shelters built by people who didn't know better. They were carefully designed homes, perfectly suited to one of the harshest environments on Earth. But building a shelter was only half the story. A house means very little if no one lives inside it. Ancient humans almost never survived alone. Humans are one of the most social species on the planet, and that was just as true tens of thousands of years ago as it is today. Most hunter-gatherer communities lived in small groups known as bands. Although numbers varied depending on the environment, many contained somewhere between 20 and 50 people. That might sound like a lot for such simple shelters, but not everyone lived under one roof. Instead, a camp usually consisted of several shelters standing close together. Each shelter was likely shared by a small family or closely related relatives, while the entire camp functioned as one community. Every person had a role. Some hunted, others gathered edible plants, some repaired tools, others prepared food, cared for children, or collected firewood. No single person could do everything alone. Survival depended on cooperation. Even children contributed. From an early age, they watched adults making tools, identifying plants, building fires, and tracking animals. There were no classrooms. Nature itself was the classroom. Knowledge wasn't written in books. It was passed from one generation to the next through observation, practice, and storytelling. At the center of almost every camp was something even more important than the shelters themselves: the fire. To us, a fireplace might simply be a source of warmth. To ancient humans, it was the heart of the entire community. It cooked food, making many plants and meats safer to eat. It produced light after sunset, extending the day long after darkness arrived. Smoke helped drive away insects. Flames discouraged many predators from coming too close. Wet clothing could be dried beside it. Stone tools could be repaired nearby. And after long days of hunting and gathering, everyone naturally gathered around the fire together. This was where stories were told, where children learned, where plans for tomorrow's hunt were made. In many ways, the fire connected the entire group. Without it, even the strongest shelter felt incomplete. Unlike our homes today, prehistoric shelters offered almost no privacy. Families slept close together, especially during cold weather when shared body heat helped everyone stay warm. Animal skins, dry grass, and soft leaves probably formed simple bedding, although archaeologists cannot know the exact sleeping arrangements for every culture. Comfort came second. Warmth came first. And perhaps the most surprising thing about these homes is that many of them were never meant to stay in one place forever. For many ancient humans, home wasn't a place. It was a journey. Unlike us, they couldn't depend on supermarkets, farms, or permanent villages. The land around them was constantly changing. Herds of reindeer, bison, and horses moved with the seasons. Fruit ripened for only a short time. Rivers shrank during dry months and flooded after heavy rains. If a group stayed in one place for too long, the food around them would eventually run out. So they moved. Not because they wanted adventure, because staying still could mean starving. Imagine spending weeks building a shelter, finally making it feel like home, only to leave it behind a month later. To us, that might seem wasteful, but to ancient humans, it was simply part of life. Some shelters were abandoned forever. Others became seasonal homes. A family might return to the exact same valley every spring because they knew fish filled the river at that time of year. In autumn, they might travel back to forests rich with nuts and berries. During winter, they could move to a more sheltered location where freezing winds were weaker. These seasonal journeys weren't random. They were based on generations of knowledge. Parents taught their children which rivers froze first, which valleys flooded, where dangerous predators were common, and where edible plants grew every year. Over time, people built a mental map of their entire landscape without ever drawing it on paper. Their world was their memory. Even though many groups traveled, they still formed deep connections with certain places. Some archaeological sites show evidence that humans returned to the same location over and over again for hundreds, and sometimes even thousands of years. Those places weren't just camps. They became part of a group's identity. You could think of them as the prehistoric equivalent of a hometown. As human intelligence continued to develop, so did their homes. Shelters slowly became more organized. Instead of simply throwing materials together, people learned which designs survived storms better, which roofs stayed warmer, and which entrances blocked cold winds most effectively. Every generation improved on what the previous one had learned. No architect ever wrote these ideas down. Knowledge spread through experience. A child watched an adult build a shelter. Years later, that child built one of their own. Then they taught the next generation. Slowly, almost invisibly, human engineering was born. One fascinating clue comes from archaeological excavations, where scientists have discovered circles of post holes in the ground. The wooden posts themselves disappeared thousands of years ago, but the holes they left behind remained. By studying these patterns, archaeologists can reconstruct the size and shape of prehistoric huts, giving us a glimpse of homes that would otherwise have vanished completely. It's a reminder that even when buildings disappear, they often leave tiny fingerprints behind. As time passed, another revolution changed everything. Around 12,000 years ago, in different parts of the world, some groups began experimenting with farming. Instead of following food, they started growing it. For the first time, moving constantly was no longer necessary. People stayed close to their crops. Temporary shelters slowly became permanent homes. Walls became stronger, roofs became heavier. Storage areas were built to protect harvested grain. Families expanded their houses because they knew they would still be living there next year. Villages began to appear. Neighbors no longer met by chance while traveling. They lived beside one another every single day. Those villages eventually became towns. Towns became cities. And cities became the world we know today. It's incredible to think that every apartment, every farmhouse, every wooden cabin, and every skyscraper on Earth belongs to the same story. A story that began with a few branches leaning against each other thousands of generations ago. The next time you close your front door, look around your home for a moment. The walls may be made of brick. The roof may be steel or concrete. Electric lights might replace the campfire, and glass windows may keep out the rain instead of animal hides. But the reason your home exists hasn't really changed. Just like the shelters of our ancient ancestors, it protects the people inside. It offers warmth when the weather turns cold, safety when the outside world becomes dangerous, and a place where families can eat together, rest together, and create memories together. The first homes were never built to show wealth. They weren't built to impress anyone. They weren't even built to last forever. They were built so that one family could survive one more freezing night, one more violent storm, one more difficult season. Inside those simple shelters, children laughed for the first time. Parents taught their sons and daughters how to make tools, find food, and understand the land around them. Stories were shared beneath the glow of a fire. Knowledge passed from one generation to the next. Long before the first city rose above the horizon, long before roads, castles, or skyscrapers, humanity had already discovered one of its greatest inventions. Not the house, the idea of home. And perhaps that's why no matter where we live today, whether it's a small apartment in a busy city or a house in the countryside, every home carries a tiny piece of the same story, a story that began tens of thousands of years ago, when our ancestors looked out across the wild landscape, gathered a few branches stretched to hide across the top, lit a fire inside, and, for the very first time, created a place they could truly call home.